Well, hello there, my friend. Welcome to another episode of Stand Up. Joining me today, I've got writer and comedian Noel Casler, and it is a great conversation. Noel is such a smart, funny, thoughtful, and thought-provoking guy, an outspoken critic, a champion of progressive social causes, a regular guest on so many different shows and podcasts, including his own, and for good reason. He has a lot to say. He's seen a lot. He's experienced a lot. He's very thoughtful and funny, and I love talking to him. Today, we talked about this country music star, Jason Aldean, and his very controversial and offensive song that's just been pulled from many platforms. We talked a little bit about RFK, because, of course, he knows him, the Trump family, other current events, and life in general. A really thoughtful conversation at the end about a recent post that he's put up at his Substack, noelcasler.substack.com. No time to recap the news on today's episode, because if I told you what happened yesterday, you wouldn't believe it. But it's all good. Lots going on. Really busy. And as I said yesterday, getting ready to leave for Australia on the 27th of July. So in the run-up to that, I'll be doing all kinds of different things. And posting, like I said yesterday, will be just a little bit erratic. I won't get things up at the exact same time I normally try to, which is midnight every day. But I will be hosting a hangout tonight. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing you there. If you're a stand-up subscriber, you should get a link, and I look forward to seeing you there. I should be at my mom and dad's if all goes as planned. So we'll be hanging out from upstate New York today, and it's been a week since we did. So I'm looking forward to seeing you, and catching up, filling you in, should be a good one. But right now, let's get to my conversation with Noel Casler. You can follow him on Twitter and all of the social media, subscribe to his podcast and his Substack. I really like this conversation. I really like Noel, and I think you will too. All right, let's do it right now with Noel Casler. There he is, Mr. Beautiful. He's so pretty. Noel Casler. Right before we started, he's like, do I look all right? Like, what a dick. Come on.
Thanks, Pete. Great to see you again, my friend.
That'd be like me saying, do I look all right? And you resisting a joke about Skeletor.
That's hilarious. Nah, dude, it's all good.
It's been
I can't tan this summer. I had a little bit of skin cancer thing removed, and I don't have my normal summer glow, so I'm self-conscious.
Man, if that were me, all I would be doing is posting about how much I'm a cancer survivor.
That was the first thing I said. I mean, it was nothing, non-life-threatening. And I was like, I'm a cancer survivor now. You know, I was like, where's my ribbon?
Yes, you have to start a fund, and it is an interesting conversation to talk about, you know, comparing your pain and so on. But I know there's obviously within the survivor community of cancer, there's a conversation within them that some people are like, you take it easy, all right? Yeah, you were diagnosed with cancer technically, and it's probably not something that anybody who hasn't had it should talk about. But I'm glad you're okay, and I'm sorry you can't tan.
I know, it's a bummer, but wear your sunblock, folks. You know, too much time on the beach for me, so I'm laying low.
But you've already traveled a bit, and yet you're still paying attention to everything that's happening in the world.
Yeah, it's hard to ignore. As we were saying, I was in Europe for a couple weeks, you know, and it was good to unplug and just get a sense of the vibe over there. People aren't in the turmoil that we're in as a people. You know what I mean? And you really get a sense of that when you step away for a minute.
But I don't know what you mean. Like the European, when you're there immersed in European culture and the times, the 2023 Europe, 23 America, there's a different, what's the vibe? What is it? What are you saying?
Absolutely different. Like I was in Amsterdam, which is a pretty happening city, but like you didn't hear horns. You didn't hear people sort of at each other's throats. You know, I was there during the biggest train blackout they'd had in a long time. Like, so we went out of Amsterdam for the day to go to Delft, which was Vermeer's birthplace. And we were coming back on the train, and the train shut down all around Amsterdam, you know, so everybody was stranded, like millions of people, you know. There was a big Harry Styles concert, and 50,000 young girls got stranded at this thing, and everybody chilled. Right. They set up alternative kind of bus routes and all this kind of stuff. And there was this spirit of cooperation. You know, people were laughing. They were cheering each other up, helping each other, giving information. And, you know, New Yorkers are great in emergencies. I'm not denying that. But there was a lack of angst, and there was a lack of distrust of your fellow man. and it was palpable. You could really feel that. And, you know, the opposite is true in America. You come to America and like dudes are going by in their pickup trucks and won't let an old lady in traffic to merge.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like, dude, who are we? You know, and a lot of that is obviously left over from Trump. He sort of divided us, which is what you don't do with the people. You know, as a comic, a crowd is like one entity and you got to keep them in the same vibe. You can't split them. When you start splitting people, bad things happen.
You're making me feel bad. I boxed an old lady in on a throughway last week, and I maniacally laughed and pointed at her between me and a semi. And then I felt better about myself, and I drove on home. But probably shouldn't have. You're right. That's the kind of person we are. You know, I was thinking as you're talking about, we've got so much diversity of culture and of custom in so many different ways that obviously provides some conflict. I think we should be able to get over it. We're all having the human experience, but I think there is a context to. Certainly, I know this is too easy, but if you leave America and you're in almost any other country in the world, you're way less worried about being shot. If you're thinking about that, I don't live my life being worried about being shot. To be fair, I don't know. Maybe I live in a place where I don't put mostly in a shed. But a lot of people I know do. And a lot of people I know don't want to come to America because, again, could be irrational given the stats. But, you just don't have that idea that somebody just might have a gun during this argument. What do you think about that as a difference?
I think that's absolutely true. I'm always looking for an exit and thinking about what's going to happen if something pops off. And, I was in Lisbon and I was there during the Feast of St. Anthony, which is he's the patron saint of sardines, and fishermen or something. So the whole town comes out to drink beer and eat sardines in Lisbon. You're talking the entire population is out on the streets getting drunk. I didn't see one fight. I didn't see one crowd where you worried about hey, somebody here could have a gun, right? Because they don't have the same, they don't have the amount of guns. They don't have the weapons. And it was refreshing to not feel that sense of foreboding that we've allowed to take over so much of American life.
Yeah. We can talk about broad context, cultural differences, you and I, or anything all the time. But there's a bunch of specific things I wanted to ask Noel Casler about. So I want to get right into it. Very few people I know have had more experience in music with musicians and as a musician than you have. And so I always like to get your take on music things, especially when they collide with some kind of cultural clash. And that's exactly what's happened. A major story this week when a country music star named Jason Aldean, who is a well-known kind of hardcore right-wing guy, has put out a song that has basically been referred to as a modern lynching song. It's been criticized. Some people are saying it's called Try That in a Small Town. I don't know how much more I need to set up. People probably know something about it. What are your thoughts on him and this controversy and the big fact that the big development is that the country music, what's CMT Network, they've pulled his song Try That in a Small Town, which is, now we're talking about something getting canceled. Noel?
Yeah, well, good for CMT for doing that. It should be pulled. It's in it, First of all, Jason Aldean is from Macon, Georgia, and went to prep school. Okay, Macon, Georgia has an airport. It's not a small town. It's got 150,000 people, right? So it's disingenuous MAGA pablum. Country music songs are written by groups of people. There's 4 people wrote that song, led by Kelly Lovelace. But let's just take, Jason Aldean. My friend was his lighting tech, worked for Banded Lights out of Nashville, and was on stage with him when the shooting happened in Las Vegas. Most people forget Jason Aldean was the act that was on stage when the guy opened fire, right? My friend was the guy who helped pull Jason off that stage, and they didn't get shot. My other friend, who was a tour guy, was in the crowd and had to hide behind a vehicle or a beer truck or a food truck or something when bullets were popping off. Now that song has a line in it. I got my granddaddy's gun. Come to my town and try to take it from me like they're trying to do, right? I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what the lyric is. That's NRA talking points. They're trying to appeal to this historical narrative of gun ownership, right? The guy in the hotel room in Vegas wasn't using his grandpappy's gun. He was using high-powered assault rifles with thousands of rounds of ammunition, which he was able to purchase in the United States. And he was able to injure 400 people and end 60 lives in a matter of seconds. right? You know, before anybody could even react, he'd already done horrific damage. So what I'm talking about is the difference between that iconography that they love to sell in this Nashville junk music, essentially, because it's pablum, right? You go to a small town, it's all strip malls and dollar stores and shut down businesses. Yeah. It's not guys out there working the fields and selling fresh corn and catching catfish with a, you know, piece of straw in their mouth. You know, they got neck tattoos and they're listening to Insane Clown Posse and smoking meth behind the 7-Eleven. Do you know what I mean? It's not Mayberry anymore, but they love to sell the Mayberry ideal, right? Because it dumbs you down, just like MAGA politics. It's designed to keep people kind of dumb, for lack of a better word, because it's profitable. It's profitable to have that demographic not think about like, hey, maybe we do need some gun reform. You know, Covenant school shooting was in Nashville just this year. A classroom of children were gunned down. So, you know, it's maddening. And somebody like Jason Aldean is sort of, you know, it's junk. You know, I forget about the musical quality, of which there is none. It's just crap. And it's, you know, it's maddening. And knowing his personal like involvement with that shooting, I think it's sort of beyond the pale.
Apparently, the music video for Try That in a Small Town was filmed at the site of a lynching.
Yes.
Amid accusations that its lyrics and message are offensive. State Representative Justin Jones of Tennessee, a Democrat, condemned the song on Twitter, describing it as a, quote, heinous song, calling for racist violence that promoted, quote, a shameful vision of gun extremism and vigilantism. What about the race angle? Do you think that's pretty obvious?
It's 100% obvious, you know, and he filmed the video on that courthouse steps where there was a famous lynching, you know, or I don't know the man's name who lost his life, but an African-American man was lynched on that spot. That's not just a dog whistle. That's a bullhorn. You know, and all the imagery in the song, like good luck robbing a liquor store or holding up an old lady in my town. You know, it's that same thug like word that they always pull out at the MAGA rallies. You know, it's trying to appeal to people's fear. They used Fox chyrons in the video and stuff. So I think it's definitely racist.
Jason Aldean, for his part, has said, in the past 24 hours, I've been accused of releasing a pro-lynching song, that song that's been out since May, and was subject to the comparison that I, direct quote, was not too pleased with the nationwide BLM protest. These references are not only meritless, but dangerous. There's not a single lyric in the song that references race or points to it, and there isn't a single video clip that isn't real news footage. And while I can try and respect others to have their own interpretation of a song with music, this one goes too far. He goes on, but I won't.
Yeah, he's an idiot. You know, he's like a bloated Kenny Chesney. If you look at the guy, he looks like the kind of guy who's going to like put a wrap on your car. You know, they put those wraps on cars, or sells you a vape pen or something, or like, I know a guy, you should get some better rims. You know? He's not he's a huckster. Modern country, you know, there's some great artists in country, you know, and thankfully we should mention some of them have spoken out. You know, Sheryl Crow, who I've worked with a lot, is pissed off. You know, there's a lot of good people down there, and I love country music. Don't get me wrong. Real country is great. I've spent a lot of time in Nashville. I've worked at the Ryman many times. But this kind of stuff is just lowest common denominator crap. And it's the last thing we need as a people at this point, you know?
Now, you also seem to be outraged at the governor of Texas, who seems like a pretty decent guy. Governor Abbott, according to you, is a sadist who you think feels emasculated and powerless deep down. A truly awful human being, you write on Twitter. I wish some Texans could stand up to this prick and get his broken ass out of office. Now, this is in reference to the great governor, Greg Abbott's border security initiatives that have been apparently ordered to push small children and nursing babies back into the Rio Grande River and not give water to asylum seekers, even in extreme heat, according to an email from a DPS trooper. This is what you're reacting to? I mean, listen, what do you want him to do?
Yeah, exactly. What's wrong with that? Trapping 19-year-old pregnant women in razor wire as if they're running across a field in World War I? Like, it's insane. And the pecan farmer tried to have that wire removed, you know, and they wouldn't do it. The governor disavowed a private landowner's farm and left it there. And if your people need any backstory on the kind of moral fiber of that man. He went jogging in River Oaks. I have family in River Oaks. It's a well-to-do neighborhood in Houston. It's called River Oaks, right? Like big trees are in the name of the town, right? The guy went jogging in a thunderstorm. A big limb fell on him, paralyzed him, which isn't cool. Don't wish that on anybody. But then he sued the homeowner and he sued the tree service, right? As if they were sort of supposed to foresee a thunderstorm. Got a huge payout, something like $9 million that he's had an annuity his whole life. He was a law student at this time. I mean, he was a young man. Became the Texas Attorney General and enacted tort reform, putting a cap on settlements in the future. So nobody else was going to get $9 million. Now it's like $250,000 is the max or something like that in Texas if you're injured through somebody else's malfeasance. So he's the sort of dude that we see a lot in Republican politics. He gets somewhere and then he pulls up the ladder so nobody else can join him. That's what we see with immigration. It's a constant theme. I got mine and you're not getting yours, because he would rather curry favor with the insurance, industry, which he did in Texas, because he was thinking about his own political career, just like he curries favor with the oil and gas industry now and lets Texans suffer every time there's a heat wave or a cold snap or whatever. He's beholden to bigger interests than himself because he cares more about money than people, which is, endemic in our politics these days.
Gotta wonder, who knows? Somebody knows when Texas goes blue, not only at the state level, but, at the national level. Those electoral votes would be a game changer. And for sure, no matter how much you wanted to screw with elections, but obviously to have a governor and a Republican legislature that would allow, for example, the expansion of Medicaid in the state. There's so many people that are uninsured the most. It's I don't know when that's ever going to happen. But I hope in our lifetime that state goes. Even getting rid of Ted Cruz would be an amazing triumph. But all right, well, I want to ask you about the latest Trump trials, man, and what your thoughts are on what's happening. I mean, we haven't talked in a while, and he's certainly been indicted, I think, twice since we talked, both the Manhattan DA and obviously what you're seeing out of the classified documents case, and the federal government, and he's almost very likely to get indicted in Georgia. And obviously, I mean, unless this is the one time it doesn't happen, he got a target letter, so he could be indicted by the time this conversation gets posted. What are your thoughts on what we're seeing with the Jack Smith investigations, these indictments, and obviously I always want to know what you think about his behavior and the fact that Jared sat down with just talk to me.
It doesn't bode well for Mr. Trump, right? I think he's finally gonna get what he's due. I think he's definitely going to get indicted in this January 6th case, or they wouldn't have sent the target letter. I think Mark Meadows probably has a big role in that. And I think that's probably the worst case scenario for Trump if Mark cut a deal or decided to talk. Jared is a snake, so Jared would have thrown Trump under the bus as much as he could, or not. Who knows how deep the nefarious, like Saudi Arabian ties go? Because my feeling has always been that, like, if Trump stole classified docs, Jared would have been the guy who sort of like brokered the deal. You know what I mean?
When you say he's a snake, I feel like it means he and his wife, Ivanka, will do whatever it takes to come out on top and to survive, including throwing the old man under the bus. I mean, I could imagine them having a talk where, like, it's either him or us. That's it. That's what we have to choose us. We have to tell them this so that we can have freedom, period.
Absolutely. 100%. The whole family's like that. I mean, they're just a den of vipers. None of them have any allegiance towards each other. And nobody knows that more than Trump, because Trump isn't loyal to anybody, wives, children, business associates. So I think Trump is sweating. I think he's probably going to be increasingly desperate. And I think it's going to be, a lot of people enjoy this, like, let's celebrate, blah, blah, blah. There's nothing to really celebrate here, because I think while all this is happening, it's taking away from the real issues we face. Thankfully, there's guys like you. You had, I think, Peter Gleick. I don't know if I'm saying his name.
Peter Gleick. Yeah.
Peter Glick on, you do a lot of environmental stuff. I mean, we have real world things that we need to get all hands on deck focusing on and thinking about. And the longer this Trump sort of chaos and saga drags out, the more time is taken away from focusing on issues that matter. That's not to say it isn't important. It's to say it's high time to wrap this up, get Trump into the system, get a trial date set, and let him do what everyone else has to do, which is keep your mouth shut when you're going to trial, obey the judge's orders. Don't try to undermine, the judicial system and have your day in court. If you're innocent, prove it. But he's obviously not innocent. We're looking at 1,000 classified documents, some of which may have been ferried out of the White House the night before by Mark Meadows. They got him dead to rights. I mean, Jack Smith is like, I would already be like, here, take me in, bro. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Well, I mean, just one bit of speculation that I want to get your reaction to, because you mentioned, looks like Mark Meadows might have talked, might have flipped, might have given up the whole game. There's so much that we probably still don't know about conversations that only had two people in them, maybe, that weren't on a text message, maybe, and trying to find out. But Joyce Vance was basically predicting, trying to find this exact tweet, though, but she's like, prediction, Jack Smith evidence, or what we see of it in this indictment, will be much stronger than people are anticipating. GOP presidential contender who continue to shill for Trump will be forced to do an about face, perhaps not immediately, but it's coming. My reading between the lines of her reading between the lines is, as you're saying, something is going to come out, something so shocking that even his sycophantic fellow candidates that might have been running for vice president are going to have to be Tim Scott, is going to have to say, sorry, this is too much. You can't. Ron DeSantis is going to jump all over him. And do you think there's any possibility of Joyce Vance being, what would it be? I mean, I can't even speculate.
I don't know what it would be, but obviously Joyce Vance knows a lot more about this stuff than I do. And I think she's hitting the nail on the head right there. I think that would be a seismic shift, right? If it was such an overwhelming thing that Trump couldn't BS his way out of it, right? Because he's still doing MAGA rallies saying, hey, I did nothing wrong. It was the Presidential Records Act. If they have a smoking gun, so to speak, nuclear weapons, classified information, something that a 5-year-old would understand is like something you don't take from the government, then I think he's in trouble. And I think the moment that happens, what Joyce had predicted there, that the Republicans are forced to denounce him on a public stage, will be the end of the modern Donald Trump era as we know it, right? His MAGA crowd will still be clamoring for the vitriol and the hate that he sort of feeds them, but there will be nowhere for it to go politically, right? Because he'll be unfeasible completely as a candidate. And then it'll just be, Chris Christie, debating Ron DeSantis, and Christie will eat him like a plate of, garlic knots and Paramus on a Sunday. You know what I mean? Like Ron DeSantis will get slaughtered by somebody like Chris Christie. Chris Christie's not going to appeal to the MAGA base, obviously, but it'll shake out. You'll get an ineffectual Glenn Youngkin or somebody like that on the bill, and Biden will clean his clock in the next election. That's the way I hope it plays out.
I will check in with you in a few months. I think that's a very possible. I don't know if it's likely. It was a very possible scenario the way you just laid that out. All right. Well, you talk about the important issues that we should be talking about. Trans folks serving in the military. Where are you on that? Pro or con? Do you think they can carry out the mission?
Absolutely. That's who I want behind me, right? You had the courage to live your truth life in America, especially like if you're African American or you came out in high school, I'm following you into the jungle.
That's a great point. I will rappel down after the guy who was marginalized his whole life. Yeah. If he made it this far.
Make them the general, because I have trans friends. I did a comedy bit, not poking fun at it, but making those points. I sat with a friend of mine who transitioned. This is a couple years before the pandemic, probably 2019. Mm-hmm. This guy was an architect in Manhattan. He'd worked as a man in his office for 20 years. He had kids. He lived up in Westchester. He decided to live his truth, in his early 50s or something. And I sat with him the night before he had to go into his office the next day. And he was scared, obviously, as anybody would be. right? He was vulnerable and he was scared and he shared it with me, but he was like, Noel, I'm going to do it anyway because it's who I am and I have to do it. And that's real bravery. Real bravery is being scared and doing it anyway, walking through fear because it's your truth and it's going to make somebody else's life easier down the road. And those are the people I'll follow anywhere. Those are the true patriots. Those are the true heroes in life, in my opinion. You know?
Very well said. Yeah, I love that. I love that. Noel for Congress. That's a good speech that others should take. I don't know if you've been watching some of these hearings on Capitol Hill over the past couple of days, but obviously when they talk about the defense authorization bill, they have been so focused, Republicans, on these culture war issues, DEI, and women being able to afford, being having their expenses paid for, God forbid, to go get health care and abortion. And that's what they're focused on for the Department of Defense. And everybody knows that those aren't issues within the military, or that the real issues in the military are an epidemic of sexual assault and white supremacy, which is why those are solutions. DEI is a solution to teach men not to be fucking monsters, to teach them right from wrong for some reason they don't know and they're not being investigated. Like, that's what those things are important, and they're trying to strip them and create a narrative about them, just as they always have.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's the same BS. You know, they're trying to inflame these cultural wars and ignore the realities. The military is a harsh place for women still. They don't have the protections. They report assaults and it doesn't get the proper, vetting it should. I worked with, when I worked on the Super Bowl, I did the flyovers every year. That was my assignment. Cool. When you hear the anthem and the planes go over the thing, I was the guy on the TV side who had to coordinate with these ground teams of like Air Force and Thunderbird. Wow. And there was all these women, that were part of the PR stuff, and they'd be these attractive young girls. And a few of them confided in me through the years, just like how much harassment, because I was like, oh, you weren't what I'd expect to see in this role. And they're like, I know. And it ain't easy. It's a burden, not just misogyny, but harassment. And we shouldn't tolerate that or stand for that for 1 second. That weakens us and it weakens our military. And I'll say one more thing. Tommy Tuberville, who plays a lot of lip service to the military, is holding up not only the Marine Commandant, but over 200 high-level positions in our military right now, weakening us as a nation. When he ran for Senate in Alabama, he's worth $20 million, by the way, obviously ex-football coach. He told the people of Alabama, if you send me to D.C., I will donate my salary to veterans' causes. The Washington Post just reported this morning he hasn't given anything.
Really?
He was lying. He was a grifter, just like Donald Trump. And he's been doing it even before he came to Senate, and that just broke this morning. So that's the same kind of thing they're doing. It's hypocrisy. They're saying we love our troops, and then they don't do anything to help them. They hinder them. They hinder the fighting forces and use them as a political football. Tuberville obviously doing it for abortion and stuff. It's maddening and it's insulting. It's as insulting as Donald Trump was to our troops, and nobody is more insulting to vets than Donald Trump.
Oh, my gosh. I'm just finding this at the Washington Post right now. Tommy Tuberville pledged to donate every dime to veterans. He hasn't. The senator earns $174,000 a year. Wow. Huh.
And let me make one more point while you're reading that.
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
When I worked on Celebrity Apprentice, which is why many of you guys know me, it was the aughts, like the 05, 06, 07. And in those years, I worked mainly in live TV. And on every show we do, including the Super Bowl, where in addition to the flyover, we would do a thing with vets just back from Iraq or Afghanistan and give them a camera shot. Every show I worked on in New York City, from the probably, after, from 2003 until 2012, we would reserve a certain amount of tickets for vets, disabled vets, guys just coming back, kids. We wanted to sort of make them feel special and make the audience aware that people were sacrificing overseas while we were having galas and TV shows and tapings back home, right? The only show that never did that was Celebrity Apprentice.
Right.
He gave his tickets to like Russian oligarchs and their girlfriends, dudes from Bay Ridge, like just as sketchy audience as you could imagine. And there was no vets. And I remember asking once, like, who's coordinating the vets for the audience? Because my buddy was a seat filler. He goes, there are none. We didn't give any tickets. He doesn't care about the vets.
Jesus. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Completely unsurprising. And there's so many other examples of that. But I mean, the other thing about Tuberville and the other thing about this defense authorization, I mean, one of the other issues, by the way, this isn't politically correct to say, but the right will go crazy when you say it. There are huge problems with domestic terrorism and radicalization, extremists of white supremacists, right-wing Christian nationalists within the military, active duty, within law enforcement, active duty, and of course, ex and veterans and so on. You're not supposed to say that. Well, we better be screaming it because they've committed or attempted to commit all kinds of domestic terrorism. They're well-trained, they understand weapons, and they've been radicalized, often as white supremacists. So we talked about sexual assault not being followed up, investigated, and that's why you need DEI. You also need it so these guys who the military is supposed to, strip them of all of those proclivities and biases and ignorance. Well, it doesn't. It radicalizes many of them. Some of them even have swastikas tattoos on them in law enforcement and in the military. Tommy Tuberville tries to act like, white nationalists aren't racist, or more importantly, the big issue, that these guys aren't a threat. They are a threat. They're the biggest threat.
Excellent point, Pete. I'm so glad you say that. And people forget that one of the first things Trump did in terms of the military and the Pentagon is because, like you said, that has been a rising threat. Even the FBI said our biggest threat is white supremacists in law enforcement and the military and these sort of militias that are forming out of these organizations. So one of the first things Trump did when he got into office was the Pentagon had a list of people of sort of organizations that would bar you from service, right? If you were part of I'm going to say Hezbollah just off the top of my head, or, Al-Qaeda, I'm not equating the two, but, there was all these obvious things. If you had links to Al-Qaeda, you weren't allowed to join the Marines, right? White supremacists and neo-Nazi groups were on that list. Trump had them removed so the Pentagon could admit them, right? People that had swastika tattoos, like you said, could now be allowed back into the military because they were banned.
I had no idea. I mean, maybe I knew that and forgot it, but
it was one of those things that slipped through because so much was coming at you. But that was 2017.
Sounds like a Stephen Miller joint.
Right. Exactly. No, exactly. We're going to remake this, this bureaucracy and this military into our image. And that's what we learned this week with the excellent reporting in the New York Times, right? About the Heritage Foundation sort of guiding the Trump people and what his next term would look like, how he would consolidate power and weaken the three branches of government, allowing him to sort of control everything. That is in the same meld as what he began in his first term.
I still haven't read that big piece. I'm not read in on what that investigative piece said, but yeah, I've heard about it. Crazy.
Yeah, well, that's what he said. It was basically like the three branches of government that James Madison and others sort of foresaw for this nation, so one person couldn't become a tyrant. They want to eliminate that. And that's been a goal for Republicans for a while, but mainly just to give more power to corporations and rich people and, almost benevolent. Trump's doing it because he wants to punish people and he wants to be sort of an oligarch and he wants to hand off power, to his kids or whoever someday. And he wants complete loyalty and obsequiousness. And the scariest thing in that article was that they would take these civil rights sort of worker protections that exist now for DOJ employees and EPA employees, for example. He could just fire them at will, right? So if the EPA said, we don't want any more coal burning plants, he could fire those 10,000 people that said that and let them burn whatever they want.
Right.
He could do things like that with a stroke of a pen, which would just be tyranny.
And such chaos, and all these people that worked for him would be on the list to be next, and everything he touches dies. Yeah. What do you everybody, you hang out with everybody. You ever hung out with RFK Jr.? Thoughts on that, Kat?
Yeah. Can we curse on this show? He's an asshole. Sorry to curse, but he's a jerk in real life. And ask anybody who's met him. I did a benefit with him at Carnegie Hall. It was, I think, Glamour Women of the Year, which was a show I did every year. And I think he was giving out an award. And I remember a lot of what I worked in was the escorts, the talent escorts. I was in the department that would assign a talent escort to a celebrity. You're a celebrity. You know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah. My whole career has been filled with talent escort relationships.
When they meet you at the car and they're like right this way.
Oh, you said talent escort. I meant just straight up escorts is what I've
escorts.
been.
Yeah.
That I paid for. Yes. Is that not the same? I thought it's
kind of the same, but it's less fun on this end. But I worked in the group that was in charge of all that, and I remember assigning this young woman. She wasn't even that young, but I remember assigning this woman to RFK Jr. and she was so excited. Right, she was going to meet a Kennedy, handsome son of Bobby Kennedy, So she went and met him at the car, brought him to the dressing room, and came up to me and was like, "He is the biggest asshole I've ever met in my life."
Wow.
He's just completely condescending. He talks through you. He's clearly out of his mind. Billy Baldwin's a friend of mine, knows him much better, lived down the street. They're from Darien, that kind of area. That's where RFK Jr. lived with his ex-wife who killed herself, and it was very suffered allegedly a lot of abuse from him.
Well, found a journal that he'd written and with all of the women that he was having sex with and also giving numbered ratings to. I mean, when I read that reporting about him and there's countless examples of the type of anecdote that you're sharing about that guy. And they add up to be pretty accurate about him. Yeah.
Yeah. Just an asshole. And sorry to curse again, but another group I was involved in for a long time was the Clearwater Foundation, which Pete Seeger founded, which cleaned up the Hudson River, which both you and I have a, vested interest in since we both live on either side of it.
Throw a rock in it. Yeah.
But I did that for years. Since I was in high school, I knew Pete. I worked with Pete. So the River Keepers, which was RFK Jr.'s first organization, a lot of hippie granola crunchy types have come in contact with him through the years. To a person, they can't stand the guy. And if you lose those kind of guys, it's sort of like if you're a rock star and your crew hates you, it says everything about who you are.
Well, what do you make of his nascent campaign for president?
I think he's a chaos agent. I think he's been manipulated by forces outside of himself. I think he fits the psychological profile that they seek out, which is like a mentally ill person. A lot of conspiracy theories and stuff, they sort of work in brains of deranged
I think he's
people.
a Bannon op. I think at some point we find out that Steve Bannon and him sat down and he planted the seed and he said he'd go hard for him and it would be, whatever it would be. But it would be a chaos agent. I mean, that's what I think. I think there's actually some connections to them. And Bannon has been very supportive of his campaigns. It's probably they're probably sitting around one day, I'm guessing.
Absolutely.
Or Bannon tapped him, as a matter of fact.
Yep. Absolutely. And Bannon is like the Svengali for half of this chaos that we're witnessing.
Yeah.
The fact that guy's still walking free.
Unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I shared the studio with him.
No, I didn't.
I shared a studio with him every day at SiriusXM. My listeners have heard so much about this, I almost, hesitate to go into it. But yeah, you're not the only one who knows a lot of assholes.
That's crazy. That's nuts.
We should just do a show about, you would crush me in minutes, but how many famous people we know that are just complete bags of trash.
Right?
You're basically.
I forget, across the street from SiriusXM on the other side of 6th Avenue, I remember I was doing a thing with Graham Nash one time, like a radio press promo, and I'm sitting in the lobby and he went in the studio and I looked behind me and it was Rush Limbaugh's studio. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, this is Rush Limbaugh's network. Like, this is crazy.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this before I let you go.
Yeah.
Then on a thoughtful note, over at your Substack, Noel Casler.substack.com, your latest piece, July 6th, is absolutely wonderful. I might almost read it after we get done. Namaste notes, blessings, and issues. Let me just give people to set the tone here, and then you can describe what you were trying to do here. You write, suffering comes from the illusion of separateness. We think we are alone. The truth of reality is that we are connected to all that exists. This is just very hard to see. The game of life is to create so many good vibes that you build a bridge in time, all that has ever been. Time to all that has ever been. This is your mission on Earth. Few understand the assignment, the individual ego, while the miracle for harnessing the power of creativity can become a tremendous hindrance to understanding that you are never alone and never will be. And then you go on, and it's really beautiful. But it's like, it's almost like prose, like a poem. What is talked about this piece and what inspired it and how you know so much about these things on your journey?
That's the stuff that I write in my legal pads that I don't ever usually share with anybody. Almost the stuff that feels like it comes through me. Like when I'm sitting out by the pond and I'm just writing what I feel. And I decided in that one Substack, because most of my stuff is just political kind of ranting and stuff. I was like, let me see what happens if I share this. Because to me, it feels true. And I'm not trying to say I have anything figured out. But like in that piece, to me, it's all about opening your heart, right? We are all connected. Whether we think so or not, it's the right hand fighting the left. Me and Jason Aldean are coming from the same thing, ultimately, right? We feel like we're individuals, but the reality of this world is it's all connected. The bees out in my field are just as important as you and I, so I think the challenge in life is we get involved in our individual egos and our desire to achieve and protect our families and stuff. And it becomes easier to think, well, what do I care about kids in Pennsylvania who don't get a free lunch anymore? Well, how does that affect me? I got to worry about getting on Metro North and going down to Wall Street tomorrow and making my money and stuff. And it does affect you because that kind of suffering, no matter where it happens, is going to affect your quality of life. To bring it back to Europe, I didn't see homeless people in Amsterdam because they didn't allow it. Not that it's against the law to be poor, but they're not going to let you fall below a certain point. They're going to give you a minimum because they know they can't really enjoy what they have if somebody has so little. And as Americans, we've forgotten that. And that particular piece, and I'll shut up. I grew up with my mom had me at 19. She was an alcoholic. She had drug problems, as you know, and I lived very poor and very vulnerable. As a young kid, I lived sort of in a neighborhood that was very multicultural, which was a blessing, but we were all pretty poor and we got free lunch programs and free breakfast, right? They would bus us in early to school to a nice leafy suburb. I lived in sort of the hood outside of DC. And these kids would get a free breakfast and they would look forward to it. French toast with some corn syrup on it. But they were excited, right? Because there was no food at home in the fridge. And I saw Reagan come in and cut that program. I saw my friends go hungry and not get breakfast anymore and have to wait till lunch to get their free lunch. It went from 2 meals a day to 1 because a lot of these kids didn't have any food at home at night, like myself half the time. Do you know what I mean? And that could have done 2 things to me in life. Right. And I've obviously do okay now, but it could have been like, hey, that was me, but now I'm a baller and I got a Mercedes and I live in I don't have a Mercedes, but you know what I mean? I live in Westchester. I got mine. Screw them. Or it could be like, how do I make sure other people don't have to go through what I went through? How do you let suffering open your heart and expand it? Yeah. That's the challenge in life. When you face hardship, let it make you more loving. You'll never go wrong in that circumstance.
I love that and I appreciate it, but I also think that your life is a really interesting life to examine, and you're good at examining yourself, and you've seen so much of life, the good, the bad, the poverty, the wealth, the struggle, the success, and you've taken something from so much of it and tried to make the world a better place, tried to make yourself better. And I like to think that I've done some of that, but I certainly haven't had the kind of adversity that you had as a child. That's for damn sure. Much less issues with addiction and other things that you and I have talked about. But one thing that I recently identified that I'd been struggling with, and I really wanted to get your perspective. I've been talking a lot about this, but I feel like you're the perfect guy to ask this because I'm sure you've thought about it, but maybe you haven't. I'm 47 and I hadn't thought about this, or I didn't know that this idea, this emotion was so pernicious and terrible for your soul. It's called self-pity. And I have a theory about it that I've been developing, and it seems to be based on some actual data and science. But those who struggle with a lot of adversity, have a lot of setbacks and different obstacles in their lives, and we could categorize, marginalized communities, but we could certainly say a white guy like you in your childhood versus mine. Mine was Bellflower Circle, bike ramps and snacks and afternoon TV and sports, and it was great. Yeah, I had some stuff. I had my own stuff, my family, but it wasn't, it was pretty darn great. Right. And what that leads to for many of us is that when we do have setbacks and we do have to overcome obstacles like I have with my job ending, my corporate media, my dream job, which is so amazing, created such a beautiful life, my marriage and other things, I spiral. And then I feel really bad for myself. Then everything gets worse, and I wallow and I stay there. And I recently found out that self-pity is bad, and that people who didn't have all those privileges often don't wallow. They're just trying to survive, or they have a better perspective. I've said enough. My thoughts are kind of, still being formed about this. I've certainly identified it in myself, and it's made me so much better that I've kind of been vulnerable enough to realize this at this point, that when I was little, something would go wrong, and I would go up and I would cry loudly until someone would come check on me, and they usually didn't, because it was like, what's this kid's fine. What's he crying about? It wasn't a big deal. But I've done that, not publicly, but certainly more privately. My family's seen it, and it's bad. More importantly, I've just sat there and felt bad for myself. I'm done talking. I want to know your thoughts on self-pity and if you've ever dealt with it.
Oh, I still deal with it. And I deal with jealousy and resentment. Why am I not? I was just up in Montreal this weekend. I'm not on the JFL festival. I'm watching, I was there for a concert. I'm seeing my friends' names on placards. I'm like, why? And then I'm like, wait a minute. I'm up here seeing my favorite band. I've already gone further than I ever thought I would. So for me, when that stuff comes up, the opposite of it is gratitude. Right.
Yes.
If I could just get in touch with what I already have and what was meant for me and make the most of that, it is an antidote to the self-pity that we all suffer from. And I love what you shared about your childhood, because, mine was rough. And then my mom went to prison. And then I moved up to Westchester with my grandparents, and I'm in the leafy suburbs. And these kids are throwing tantrums because daddy won't buy them a dirt bike.
Right.
And I'm like, dirt bike.
That was me. That was me. I had a day of sadness, and I tried to let my dad know, because he wouldn't buy me a lacrosse helmet. I wanted a helmet.
Right. So it's just perspective. Then, not to say that that's wrong.
That's exactly me.
Right. No, that was the same thing.
I was so upset.
Right. I was like, when I was a kid, if you live in a house, you're rich. Like, just a house. Right. It can be a 2-bedroom house, but it was a house on any kind of land. You made it. You were rich. You were Brady Bunch. You were what we dreamed about in these tiny apartments, and it's perspective, right? You don't know anymore because you haven't expanded. Once you get another shot on things, for example, in America, even the poorest person, and it's not to say there isn't suffering, is better off than poor people in other countries.
Yeah, if your water runs and you have a place to shit.
Right, exactly. So it's all relative is my point. So you have to always stay in touch with what your journey is, because ultimately that's just all stuff and circumstance anyway. If you're here and you're breathing, you got the goods. What matters is inside of you. It's the consciousness and the ability to spread kindness and love and help others. That's all that matters. Wake up every day and say, how can I help somebody? And you'll never go wrong. And we all get pity. I worked with Bill Clinton a lot I was his escort on a lot of shows. And say what you want about Clinton, I've learned a lot from that guy. He's a brilliant guy, obviously. And his childhood was, he was a divorced kid. I think he has a brother, right, Roger. Yeah. But he grew up poor, and he had a lot of self-pity, and he had to bootstrap himself up. But even as an adult, he repeats that message. Like, I'll let myself feel sorry for myself for 5 minutes, and then I pick myself up and I keep trying to help others. And that's what it's about. Yeah, I think it's important to kind of differentiate between it's okay to feel bad. It's okay to feel setbacks and even jealousy. But when you stay there for a long period of time and it affects your life, as Stephen Fry has this amazing quote, goes on for 2.5 minutes about how just the worst device of all is self-pity. And I had no idea. I didn't know it was so corrosive. Very corrosive, because you're blocking the sunlight of the spirit, so to speak. Like, what do you're Pete Dominic. You're a handsome man. You got a very successful show. You got a beautiful family, you've done so many good things. Well, my thing is now, as my gratitude, I do meditation every day. And one of the things I focus on every day, because I'm 47 and I want to stay this way, is my joints. Every day I take deep gratitude that my shoulders, knees, hips, and elbows don't provide me with any pain. They will, and I'm sure I'll get injured because I'm trying to stay in good shape or something, but every day they're not. I'm like, this is a good day that my knees don't hurt. My back doesn't hurt. That's it, baby. I'm 52. I'm a couple years older than you, even though I look much younger. But As I said, I was in Montreal, and our hotel, like there was the mountain that's Montreal, right? Like there's a big park at the top of the city.
Yeah.
And I went and climbed up these stairs to get to this park. And I felt like I was climbing like Mount Kilimanjaro or something. I'm like, this is insane, but I got back down and my knees didn't blow up as they do. I get water on the knee and stuff. And that's what it's about. Your body works. You're in this vessel. Take care of it, love others, and you'll never go wrong,
Great place to end, buddy. Thank you so much for talking to me. Always love it. I'm going to come see you very soon. I keep threatening, but this time I'm following up.
Anytime, brother. Namaste. Love you, dude.
Namaste. Love you too, buddy.
Man. Thank you.
Oh, man, how about it? What do you think? Noel Casler. NoelCasler.substack.com. Go subscribe and find out more with all of the links in today's show notes. Again, sorry for the erratic posting and not having a news recap. I'm working hard to get these things, these great conversations booked and up for you this and next week. And I cannot do it without your support and your paid subscription. This is how I'm making a living, and I am hoping that you'll consider a subscription if you haven't already. Thanks to all of you who have and have decided to pay more for your subscription. You can always do that. It's as little as $5 or as much as you want. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. Go write a review on the YouTubes, more specifically Spotify and iTunes or wherever you're listening. And thanks so much. I hope to see you at tonight's Hangout. John Carroll. Check him out on his new improved website, johncarroll.org, and buy this song there. Hopefully we'll see him tonight as well. Bye-bye.
There's a whole lot more of us who know us right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. And even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.